folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. A final destined meeting, wouldn't you say, dear brother? Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Hirsch, and this week we are doing another movie review. This is House of the Long Shadows. Released in 1983, directed by Pete Walker, and starring none other than Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and John Carradine together in one film. Wow. You might get 2 or 3 of them together in one film, but all 4? Whew. So House of the Long Shadows was distributed by Cannon Films, who had quite the string of hits in the 80s, kind of these lower budget films, but a lot of time they were able to get kind of these old classic actors. So these legendary figures are at advanced age at this point, but they still command the screen with a great vigor. You know, they still had it at this point, as is obvious in this film. The film also stars Desi Arnaz Jr., son of the late, great Lucille Ball, and Desi Arnaz Sr., of course, of I Love Lucy fame. And I have to say, there's a reason you don't really hear too much about him. He's not the greatest actor in the world, you know. Certainly not of the caliber of these legendary figures he's getting to share the screen with, and he's hardly worthy of it. And it's pretty obvious when you watch the film that he doesn't really belong with these great figures of cinema. But I guess he's decent enough, you know, he gets the job done, but like I said, it's pretty noticeable. But yeah, House of the Long Shadows is a gothic horror film in the vein of Hammer Films and Amicus Films. It's like the 2 films companies got together to make this film, but no, it's distributed by Cannon, but that's the feel I get from it. So what happens is we meet this young guy, Kenneth McGee, who is a famous novelist, a best-selling author, whose latest novel isn't quite doing that well as some of his others have. So he gets together with his publisher, and they decide, well, you know, maybe he should try something a little different, you know. Maybe now's the time to branch out and take a risk. And maybe try something like the old authors of the day, like William Shakespeare, or do something like Wuthering Heights. And he's like, oh, that over-the-top stuff, I could easily knock that out in 24 hours. And his publisher's like, you kidding me? You telling me you could make a great classic novel in 24 hours? I don't think so. So they make a friendly wager of $20,000 for him to come up with a great novel in 24 hours. So Kenneth decides, hey, I can do it, but I need somewhere that's very secluded, somewhere with great atmosphere that I could go to write the novel. So he does. The publisher recommends a place that he owns called Bald Plate Manor. And, so he makes the big trek out to Bald Plate Manor. And, he kind of gets lost along the way, and he stops off at the local bus station to try and get directions. And he meets this young couple that's there, that's been there for hours, and the bus never seems to come. And it's raining, it's pouring, it's getting dark out. The lightning is coming out. A perfect setting for a gothic horror film, right? And there's this old conductor there, and he says, well, you need to buy tickets. He's like, no, I'm here to find Bald Plate Manor. Have you heard of it? And, of course, you get that classic old man thing in horror where they try to warn you, Bald Plate Manor, no, that place is cursed. You can't go there. It's haunted. It's evil, you know. Typical stuff you see in the horror films like this. He ends up going there anyway, of course, because he's got a job to do, right? He's made a bet for $20,000. He's got to go through with it. So he makes the trek out to Baldpate Manor, and of course it's raining, it's pouring, it's lightning out. And he sees this old Gothic mansion. Beautiful old building, but it's kind of run down and worn down, and once he goes inside, you got the cobwebs everywhere, there's no electricity, everything is candlelight. So yeah, he's like, hey, this is perfect, he busts out the typewriter, starts writing, and then along the way he kind of run into this old couple, played by John Carradine and Sheila Keith. And they're like, what are you doing here, And he's like, what are you doing here? I was given permission by the owner of this mansion, who's my publisher. And he's like, oh. And then they end up running into this other old guy played by Peter Cushing, by the name of Sebastian. And apparently his car died out, and, he stalled out, and that's why he's there. And it's funny, we start running into these legends, Vincent Price and Christopher Lee, and they all get their moment to shine. They all get these great introductions as they all kind of, one at a time, stumble into the manor. And Vincent Price comes in and, of course I have every right to be here, And he's got his long cloak, his cape, and his hat, looking very sinister, as only Vincent Price can do. And he's like, well, I'm Lionel Grisbane, I lived here. This was my house as a child. And it turns out that him and Sebastian are brothers. And they lived in that house. They grew up in that house. And actually, the old man who's playing the caretaker is actually their father, Elijah Grisbane. And that's his daughter, played by Sheila Keith, plays Victoria Grisbane, So now that all the secret's out, they try and get together and hash out what's going on. And Christopher Lee plays Mr. Corrigan, who apparently wants to buy the manor. So he's kind of into real estate. He wants to buy this beautiful old manor and have it torn down and have a new manor put up, And that kind of pisses off all the others, because they grew up in this house. You can't tear this down. Are you crazy, And they start talking. They have a big dinner together, and we find out some secrets about the old manor and what happened there in the past and the bad things that happened there. And it turns out they had a younger brother by the name of Roderick Grisbane. And at 12 years old, they had to lock him up in his room. And apparently he's still supposedly up there 40 years later. Because apparently they have not returned to this house in 40 years. They just happened to all gather together that one night 40 years later, while this author happens to be there typing this new novel. Coincidence? I think not. So they all decide to get together and go up to the room where Roderick's supposed to be. And apparently the reason they locked him in that room is because they thought he was evil. He actually seduced this young village woman into joining him up at the manor, and he was going to marry her and everything, and he ends up, she ends up getting pregnant, and he couldn't have that, so he ended up killing her and slicing her stomach open, murdering her. So that they're like, wow, this guy's nuts. So they locked him in the room. That's why they locked him in the room, and apparently he's been there for 40 years. So they go up and check on him, and he's not there. Like, oh, what are we gonna do? And they end up running into the body of the young village woman who he murdered, who's all crusty and hanging from the rope, and you see the big knife sticking in her gut, and it's pretty nasty. And so the rest of the movie they spend kind of looking for Roderick, because he's on the loose apparently. And then they all starting to drop off, you know. The father ends up having a heart attack and dies. And then the younger brother Sebastian, played by Peter Cushing, ends up killing himself because he's kind of the cowardly guy in this movie, and it's kind of funny to see Peter Cushing be the coward in this movie, because you know him as Van Helsing, this powerful guy, you know, or Victor Frankenstein, the supremely evil guy, you know, this intense, brooding guy. But here he's like kind of the coward of the movie, you know, running scared. But yeah, he ends up killing himself. He ends up hanging himself, you know. So people start dropping off like flies because of Roderick, you know. They're out looking for Roderick. And what happens is we find out exactly who Roderick is. And, you know, it's a big secret, but all along the way, you know, they kind of throw red herrings. You know, oh, maybe it's this guy, he has the motive, or maybe it's Vincent Price, he's got the motive, you know. So yeah, they kind of throw these red herrings at you along the way, and it becomes very much a murder mystery in the classic sense, like a Clue-style haunted house murder mystery, and that's really cool. And it's got some great visuals with the whole movie takes place in the Baldpate Manor, really. But it's great for the visuals. They do a great job. It's a beautiful, old, you know, classic Gothic mansion, perfect for a horror film, right? And they use it to the utmost. You know, cobwebs everywhere. You know, everything's dusty and dirty and broken down, and it looks great. It's got some decent gore to it too. Some bloody kills. You know, this was the 80s, so early 80s, the slasher era. You know, a big slasher boom era of the early 80s. That we were right in the thick of it here in 1983. So there is that little bit of influence in here, as well as the old classic Hammer and Amicus style. So there's a lot of that in here as well, because you know, Cannon did produce several films like that, you know, slasher films, and you know, stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 and stuff like that. There's definitely some of that in here. There's a little gore in here. At one point we see Christopher Lee with the old battle axe, you know. I'm not going to say what happens, I don't want to give it away, and yeah, so there is a huge twist ending in the film, which I'm not going to give away because definitely want you guys to check it out, because I think you guys are going to love it. You know, if you guys are a fan of, obviously, any of these legends, and if you love horror, you're a fan of some of these people. I mean, you gotta be. I mean, you got Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, John Carradine together. I mean, you've had to see some of their movies. I mean, so you owe it to yourself to get this awesome Gothic horror film, House of the Long Shadows. I mean, it's worth the price of admission alone just to see these great actors together in one movie, and they're all fantastic. They do a great job in this movie. So this film definitely does them justice and gives them their moment to shine, each one of them. So yeah, highly recommend House of the Long Shadows. I give it 2 devil horns up. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Urshan, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.thehorrorcona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.thehorrorcona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.thehorrorcona.com.